state your full name?
Kevin Cabrera.
Can you tell us a little bit of what you're going to be talking about today?
We are here at the Heritage Museum of Orange County in Santa Ana, California, and I am going to be speaking on behalf of the museum a little bit about the migration stories of the Kellogg family and maybe a little bit of the Mag family, but primarily the Kellogg family. We're here at the Kellogg House. We're going to talk a little bit about the story of the Kellogg family and how everything came to be here at 3101 West Harvard as a museum. But just a little bit of background information on the Kellogg family. The Kellogg family was originated from England, and I think they were about 3 centuries in England, and then it was Joseph Kellogg who first migrated to, I believe it was New York, Northampton, in the early 1700s. And I'm not too familiar with that back end of the story of when the family migrated from England into the United States. But once they migrated to the United States, then they found a foundation here in the United States. And it was Benjamin Franklin Kellogg, who is the father of Hiram Kellogg, who built this house. It was really his father, who is Captain Elisha. It was Captain Elisha who's where I kind of know most of the information about the Kellogg family. So Captain Elisha, they lived in Illinois. So eventually, at some point, family moved westward into Illinois, and Captain Elisha married a young lady named Elizabeth Derrick. And Captain, he was part of the War of 1812, and I think they had about 6 kids. One of them being Benjamin Franklin Kellogg. Benjamin Franklin Ephraim Kellogg. And it was Benjamin who, with his brother Florentine, started the migration towards California. Now, they weren't originally planning on going to California. Their plan was to actually head to the Rocky Mountains and search for silver. There's a lot of silver mines in the Rocky Mountains. So in 1844, sorry, they moved westward from, it was Daviess County, Illinois, towards the west coast. And eventually made it to the Rocky Mountains. Did not find silver, did not make it rich finding silver. They thought they would. But then ended up settling there for a little bit of time. And I guess famous story is when they were in that area, they were robbed by some Native Americans. I think it was the Pawnee Native Americans. And were kind of like in a very dire state. They ended up moving up a little bit north to Fort Laramie, and they helped build and construct Fort Laramie, which was one of the major forts in this side of the Mississippi for the United States government. After that happened, then they decided that they were going to head west. So their original goal was never to head to California. They were actually just wanted to find silver and head back to Illinois. Both Florentine and Benjamin Franklin were single men at the time. So as they decided to head west, then they were just like, they had heard all the stories of land, resources in California. So they were actually just prospecting for resources. There's a very unique tie between the Kellogg family and the Donner Party, which are a lot of people are very familiar with the Donner Party. They made it, they were trapped heading over the Sierra Nevada mountains because they were told to go through the Hastings Cutoff, which was actually a very, very bad route to go through. But they did not go with the Donner Party through that cutoff. I think they were aware of the terrain. They knew and they heard stories of the cutoff, and so they decided to just kind of break off from the Donner Party and head over to the Sierras on their own. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure if they actually met up with another wagon camp. They probably did. I'm not too familiar with those details. Donner Party got stuck in the Sierra Nevadas. They ended up dying, cannibalism. The whole story of the Donner Party is very well known. Once Benjamin Franklin and Florentine made it to California, they settled in St. Helena, which is now which is now in the Napa Valley, and kind of started their own life. Eventually, what happened was they both settled in Napa, and Florentine moved down to Goleta, which is Santa Barbara area. So they kind of split off once they got there. And Benjamin Franklin was in Napa for a very long time, from the 1940s until the 1840s, until the 1860s. So he was there for about 25 years. And when he was in, so let me back up a little bit. So Benjamin got to the United States, or to California, in 1846, which is a very unique time of United States history. That was basically the start of the Mexican-American War. And here in California, you had a lot more Europeans and American Europeans and Americans moving into California. And so you had the war start. Benjamin Franklin actually joined Fremont's army to defend, which is called the Bear Flag, the Bear Flag Rebellion. And then his participation in the war is not too documented, but he only served for a few months. He only served for about 6 months, and then was discharged. After that, he met his wife, or the lady that he was going to become his wife. Her name was Mary Lily Orilla. By stance, it's actually really interesting that she actually was from Illinois as well, and did the westward trek to California, and settled in St. Helena as well. But she did that after the gold rush. She did the trek in 1853. And then it was there when they met. They eventually got married. And they had 9 kids together. So their first 8 kids were born in St. Helena, and the 9th kid was born here in Anaheim once they migrated down to Anaheim. Now, Hiram Clay Kellogg, the gentleman who built this house, was the oldest child. He was the firstborn oldest child. And then it was Mary Elizabeth, she was number 2, Irwin Franklin, Louisa Jane, Leonard Grant, Edward Lawley, Lily May. So those were the 8 kids that they had in St. Helena. And then the last daughter that they had was Effa Clara, and she was born, was Carolina Abigail, and she was born in Anaheim. They migrated down to Anaheim in 1868, and they bought 640 acres of land. And the land is, it's all developed now, but it's basically Ball Road and Brookhurst. Um, and they were farmers, most dairy farmers. They raised cattle. And the first few years were really rough. There was a pretty significant drought in the 1850s. So they were still coming, and in the 1860s there was a lot of flooding. So they came after the flooding. So it was the first few years were pretty rough for them, and I think that was one of the main reasons they were able to get so much land, was because it was still there was still a lot of not flooding, but there was still a lot of the remnants of the flood from the early 60s. In the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, up until the early 1900s, Orange County was still fairly, it wasn't very large. So you had basically three main towns, three main cities, which was Anaheim, which was originally a German colony. You had Santa Ana and Orange. And those were like the three main hubs of Orange County. Then you had like smaller municipalities throughout the county. So for him to work for Anaheim Water Union, which was the water district bringing in water into the city, was very important. And then when he came to Santa Ana, same thing with Santa Ana, was really kind of what led to more growth within the area. What ended up happening with Hiram is his dad wanted him to take over the business, take over the dairy farm and the land, and he did not want to. He had always kind of been very intrigued at engineering, and always really just liked building stuff, and so he wanted to go into engineering as a field. His dad said, "No, I'm not gonna help you do that," and so he basically said, "Okay, fine, I'll do it on my own." He ended up getting a job as like at a grocery store, and saved up money to pay for himself to go to college. So he went to college at Wilmington College, which no longer exists, and became a civil engineer, studied engineering. He became a licensed civil engineer, a licensed land surveyor, but he really, even though he was a civil engineer, he really considered himself a hydraulic engineer. Hiram was married twice. His first wife, Victoria Schultz, she came from the Midwest as well. So I'm not exactly sure how she got here, but they met and got married in 1886. And they had one child. Her name was Sybil. But Victoria passed away after giving birth to Sybil. And she was born in 1891. And after she passed away, then he was a widow. So he had a daughter, and he was just, by himself. And then he remarried Helen Kellogg, in 1895. Helen was originally from North Dakota, and Hiram was already down here in Anaheim, and her dad, Helen's dad, her name was Horace Kellogg, so his initials were K, and she was sending letters to her dad, but since Hiram was really well known around the area, he was actually receiving all these letters from her. And he started writing back to her, and he was like, I'm not your dad, but he like kind of told her story, like, I'm like I'm a recent widow, and I have a kid, and he's all, I'm looking for a wife. Would you want to be my wife? And she was just like, and it was funny. Um, he was like, the only thing I don't like is I don't like women. I don't like redheaded women. Um, and I guess she responded back and said, well, yeah, I don't mind. I wouldn't mind marrying you, but I am redheaded. So it was like, and then they ended up meeting like halfway. So he was here in Anaheim. She was from North Dakota, and they met halfway in Portland, and they got married in Portland and then came back down. Um, and there is actually a really unique newspaper article that I just came across. Not just came across, but it was like a few months ago. And the newspaper article is talking about how at that time he was actually the deputy surveyor of Orange County. So it's a appointed position by Orange County. So he was basically in charge of all the surveying projects of the county. And the newspaper is talking about how he's going to be leaving Santa Ana to go get married, and he's going to disband, like he's going to leave his post. So it says like if he leaves his post for a certain amount of days, I think it's like 20 days or something, then he's automatically like kicked off of his appointed position. So it was a really interesting article, but I guess they're like, oh, we'll like cut him some slack because he was going to go get married, and then they were going to be like on a like 3-week vacation or something. Helen and Hiram had 4 kids together. So their oldest daughter was Helen, named after mom, and their second child was Hiram Clay Kellogg Jr., so named after dad. Third kid was another son, Leonard Franklin, and then their fourth kid was a daughter who was named Oahu Rose. I think he was really, really close with his brother Leonard, who was his business partner. So that was the reason why he named his second son after him. And then, back in those days, most kids were named after their dad. So most people were a junior. When he was starting to design, he designed this house, he incorporated a lot of the nautical themes into the house. So you have like the circular staircase, you have the ship mast. That ship mast is pretty unique. The folklore of the family is that he actually took that mast from an abandoned ship in the San Francisco harbor. So when like full-fledged gold rush hit in 1849, you just had ships just flock into the harbor of San Francisco harbor, and then people just took off, and they went into the gold fields. And you can see like fine photographs at like different repositories of like the pictures of the harbor, and it's just like hundreds of ships. They're like just crammed tight, and they're just completely abandoned. And so word is that he got one of the masts from the abandoned ship there, and had it shipped down here so he can use that as a centerpiece of his house. So there's also he was also told that he couldn't build a circular staircase by some people he was consulting with. So there's a few different plans of the house that don't incorporate the circular staircase, but he was always like, if you can't tell me I can't do it, then I'll do it. And he did it. So it's a really beautiful staircase. And I just really like how he incorporated all the ship themes into the house. The roof of the house is there's the crow's nest, which is unique to very unique architecture in terms of this area. A lot of homes that had crow's nests would have been along, closer to the beach. So I think we're about 12 miles from the beach. So, but it was just that whole idea of just incorporating those themes. Just like a very unique, like fun fact about the family, is when this house was originally located in downtown Santa Ana, off Walnut and Orange. So if you know anything about the city, First and Main Street. So if you go 2 blocks east and 1 block south, that's the corner of Walnut and Orange. So the house was originally located on that corner. The room that we are in, it was the master suite. So this is where Hiram and Helen had this was their bedroom. The room directly east, it's a small little room he called his laboratory. So what he would do is he would, travel to different sites and he would survey land and kind of do his calculations. And then he would come back home and he would do most of his actual map drawing and everything that he would have to do inside that room. So they called that his laboratory. Then the 2 other rooms that we have a restroom, which is really unique. The house was built in 1898, and it has an indoor restroom and indoor plumbing. So most homes during that period did not have indoor plumbing because sewer systems were barely getting developed, and he was helping develop those sewer systems in the city. But he had, like I said, he had that foresight to know, hey, we're developing sewer lines, so when I build this house, I'm going to build sewer lines so we can connect it. And then we have the room on the southwest side, which was the girls' room. So it was Helen and Arahu Rose. And just a little bit about them. Helen was she was really she had a lot of musical talent. So she played the piano. She learned the piano from her mom, and she played the violin. And then she also taught Arahu Rose how to play the piano. In our archive, we have a lot of music sheets and of the family. And I think Helen, the mom, Helen, actually composed some of her own little pieces too. And then on the bedroom that's right over here, the northeast corner, that was the boys' bedroom. And then we have another small little room which they called it was the guest bedroom. Sybil did not live in the house. She actually went to a prep school in Los Angeles. So she lived at prep school. And she had just kind of a very tumultuous relationship with Helen. I think Helen was very probably jealous of her, as not being her real daughter and her being the stepmom. And then on the first floor, we have our parlors. We have 2 parlors. We have a kitchen. We have the dining room, which the dining room is probably my favorite room in the house. It's a circular. It's an oval, and it's a perfect oval. And the flooring is it's all inlaid flooring, tongue and groove flooring. So no nails, no nothing. It's real kind of an engineering feat, and he got that inspiration of the oval floor from the Oval Office of the president. And then there's a little unique landing area as you're going up the stairs, and that was just kind of more of like the nautical theme of the house. A captain would always like speak down to his crew from his, from his little deck. And so whenever Hiram would have guests over, he would actually like go up and welcome them. And they're sitting at the dining room table and all that. And then he has his own separate office, and that office was just for him. And that's where he kind of did all his business transactions and business dealings. And then his own separate office actually has a door that leads out into the porch. So if anyone needed to actually come and see him, they can just come in through his side door and not necessarily disturb the rest of the family. And then you have the third floor, which when you look at it from the second floor, it looks like an oval, looks like a circle, or it practically is. And he built that to look like the crow's nest. Yeah, the crow's nest. So I think I was talking earlier, and I mentioned the crow's nest being on the third floor. That's the widow's walk. So the widow's walk on the highest part of the house, and the crow's nest is this part. A lot of the projects that he worked on throughout his life had to do with water, and he was really fascinated with water. And at this kind of point in time, early towards the end of the 1800s, and it wasn't even considered Orange County at the time, water was very important. You had basically the main source of water was the Santa Ana River. You didn't necessarily have sewer lines or sewer systems, and so he went into a field which was highly needed, specifically in this area, and ended up doing many projects. Was part of water districts. So the two main water districts that he was part of was Anaheim Water Union and SAVI, Santa Ana Valley Irrigation Company. What I always found really fascinating is kind of his designs and what he did. He worked a lot with circles, and you can see the circle theme a lot in this home. But what made Corona unique was Corona, the original city was actually within a circle. Called it the Circle City. It was also called, there's a lot of names for it, but it was also called the Queen Colony. But the main city was actually inside the circle, which is Grand Avenue. So it's like a complete 360 circle. And they used that circle for, like later on in the 1910s, they used that circle for car races. So they would actually, that was the racetrack. And then a lot of people got hurt in car crash, so they kind of just disbanded all the races. But before the car races, they did like horse races around that. So I've been told that he also helped with the design of the Orange Circle, or the Orange Plaza. Some people call the plaza. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any documentation of that. But I wouldn't be surprised if he had some sort of, he did some sort of consultant work. But he was really well respected throughout the area. He was considered an expert in water and water rights, and just kind of helped out and with a lot of other smaller projects that we might not know of. So he helped kind of construct the Yorba Dam up in Yorba Linda, and there's actually a street in Yorba Linda named after him. So there's Kellogg Street. There's no street in Santa Ana named after Kellogg, but there is a street in Corona. It's named I think it's Corona Avenue or Corona Street. He traveled a lot with a lot of his projects. So one of them his first main project was actually during all the irrigation and surveying all the land for the vineyards in Anaheim, and then he also did some vineyards in Pasadena, and then he also traveled to Arizona, the Southwest Arizona, and did some irrigation district. He worked on irrigation in there. He helped build the Gia Dam and do some irrigation out there. He also traveled to Oakland and did some work in Oakland. Um, and then in terms of just traveling, he also went to Hawaii on two separate occasions and helped build two dams in Hawaii. So he would travel by boat. The first time that he went to Hawaii, he traveled alone. Not alone. He actually traveled with his brother, Leonard Grant, which, and actually a lot of the projects that he did with his brother Leonard. Um, uh, they were like partners, and so they traveled and they helped build the Wahiawa Dam, which at that time, which I think they built it, they finished it in 19, it was, I think, if I remember correctly, it was finished in 1900. And it was the largest dam in the world when they completed that. And then he went back a few years later and helped construct and build, no, he did not help construct, he helped what's the word? Renovate the Nuuanu Dam because it was having issues. So I think it was during those travels of back and forth through from California to Hawaii, he really developed the love for ships, and it was always really interested in ships and just the whole idea of not just water but just ships. In terms of just kind of movement at that point of time, he would have traveled by horse and buggy. So it would have taken time to just travel, especially like going towards like Pasadena area. But like, I mean, throughout the city was fairly small. Basically, how he kind of kept in touch with his family was through mail. So, mail was very important. So they would use the postal service, and he would write letters. So we have quite a bit of correspondence that talks about what he's doing. He also kept a lot of journals. So like he would have like his daily journals, and he would talk about things he was doing. So I think one of the most I think unique items that we have in our archival collection of him, of the family, is his journal when he went to the 1892 World's Fair. And so it was the first World's Fair, and it was in Chicago. And he has a pretty, it's not a big journal, but it's a nice sized journal, and he talks about everything that he's seen inside the journal. And I think one of the most things that I find most fascinated about Hiram is that he always really kind of kept up with technology, and was always like interested in like the newest inventions, newest technology, because he would not just use it for his work in terms of surveying and engineering, but I think he was just like he was always a forward thinker. He was always like kind of thinking ahead of like what is going to be best in the future. And so, and the World's Fairs were known to bring in all like inventors and it's like all like I guess today it's like what we would consider like all these like startup companies and things of that nature. I like all these just come up to like these conventions and then like with all their new ideas. But he really kind of kept up, and he used a lot of some of these things within his house. So I think the most interesting part was the glass prisms and how he incorporated that into the front porch of the basement, or the front porch of the house. And basically that technology was used to let light into basements. And it wasn't really meant to let light into basements of homes. It was more used in downtowns, because a lot of the buildings in downtowns had basements for kind of other office units, um, and and so he incorporated those things into his house because he had space downstairs where he had an office. He actually purchased had the first Cadillac in the county. I don't know if it was in the county or in the city, um, but it was you had to crank it to start it going. So, and there's a funny story about him, and I don't think it was here in Santa Ana. It might have been in Garden Grove, but he was actually driving down the street, and he was going he was going in the wrong direction, and he got stopped, and they said, you're driving the wrong way down the street. And he's like, I can do what I want. I built this road. So he was really like, I think he was just really, I don't know, he was just a character. He kind of had a lot of, not, just demanded a lot of like respect and like control. But, he was, even within that, he was really well respected around the community. This theme of just kind of migration and moving is a very unique story of how the museum came to be, and how the museum is now here on Harvard and Fairview, but it was originally in the other side of town. And essentially what happened was Hiram passed away in 1921. He was fairly young. He was 66 years old when he passed away. And his wife, Helen, stayed in the house. She lived in the house. She did not pass away until 1962, and she was 93 years old when she passed away. So from 1920s to the 1960s, she still lived in the house, and then she ended up remarrying a gentleman who was a doctor, but I think she outlived him as well. But after she passed away, the house was then inherited by Hiram Clay Kellogg III. So I'll back up a little. Hiram the First had 4 kids. His firstborn son was Hiram Clay Kellogg II. He ended up having 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. Jean, Marilyn are the 2 girls, and then the boy he named Hiram Kellogg III. So he was number 3. Hiram Clay Kellogg III married a lady named Janice, who recently passed away. She passed away about a year and a half ago. Who was like the matriarch of the family. And Hiram III and Janice had 2 kids, Hiram Clay Kellogg IV and Catherine. Hiram Clay Kellogg IV has 2 kids. He has a boy and a girl, Chelsea and Hiram Clay Kellogg V. And Hiram Clay Kellogg V is married, and they just had a kid, but they have a girl. So there's still no number 6, but I don't think if he has a boy, he would name him Hiram. Talk to him, and he's kind of adamant that he doesn't want to name it Hiram, but I don't know. Who knows? But essentially, I'll regress. Hiram III inherited the house when his mother died, or it would have been his grandmother, and he was already living with his family in Garden Grove. None of the family didn't move back into the home. It was her home. So he was moving. He lived with his family, and essentially what the family did was he rented out the house. And then it was in the late 70s when he decided he was just going to sell the house. Even though it was, beautiful home, family didn't really have too much of a connection to the house anymore, and was going to sell it. And then at that point, you had some teachers um, who knew, I don't know if they knew the family directly or they just heard about the house being sold. And these teachers were also very concerned about students in Santa Ana not being able to go on field trips. And so they had approached the family to donate the house, and if they can get it moved to this location, then it would be used as a children's museum. And essentially the house would be used to teach students about life during the latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, so late 1800s life, how a family would have lived. So the family agreed and donated the house, and then the house got moved here on this site in 1980, which was a pretty big feat. Essentially what they did was they raised the house off its foundation. They put it on a huge trailer, and then they just drove down First Street. So drove down First Street in the middle of the night, but basically just drove down First Street and then up Fairview, and then laid it here on property. So when they were developing everything, they wanted the house to be very, very similar to how it was at its original location. So the house is still facing east, just how it was, and it's kind of on this kind of corner, just kind of like how they kind of built the foundation here. It's on like a corner, like it looks like it's the street corner. And so since house was moved here in 1980, the museum didn't officially open up until 1985. But since 1985, we've been a destination for not just Santa Ana students, but students around the county to visit the museum, and especially the Kellogg House, to learn about history of the family. They learn about Hiram and his family and what he did, but then also about life during turn of the century. And then oddly enough, we have a lot of students from, we have quite a few, probably a couple schools that come from Corona to visit the house, because they learn about local history in third grade, and they learn about Hiram Kellogg in school because he built and developed the city of Corona. So then they come to the museum to, see his house and see the house he built and learn a little bit more about him. So that's just kind of a whole unique story of just getting the house here and what it's used for now. But it's just a very unique home, and it's beautiful, and I know the kids love it and really enjoy it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I missed. Let me look. I don't think so.